Hey everyone, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I have beautiful and lovely conversations with other writers and try to figure out what's wrong with us. And I usually never get quite an answer to that question, but it is kind of like psychotherapy. Every time I do one of these, I feel like I certainly learn about the guest, and sometimes I learn a little bit about myself, and that's always a good thing. It's late April, and I'm ashamed to say this episode that I recorded today, I recorded back in January. So, sometimes it's a little hard to get organized. I record these episodes and then I have to, stagger them, getting them out, because I put them out every 1 or 2 weeks or so. And I always get a little stressed out that I'm not going to have enough episodes, that I'm going to run out. So I tend to record a lot. And then now it results in sometimes it takes months for something to finally come out. So in January, I spoke to author Katie Lattari, who is on the show today. So Katie, I wasn't familiar with Katie, but I found out who she was because we have a mutual publisher in Source Books. So Katie's debut novel came out last year, and it's a thriller, and it's got a great title. So the title is Dark Things I Adore. And she was fortunate enough. Debut novel actually gets reviewed by the New York Times, who calls The Dark Things I Adore a spider web of revenge whose careful and sinewy plotting reveals in chilling detail who gets to make art and who gets subsumed in the process. So that's pretty awesome. And she lives in Bangor, so Stephen territory. And we had a delightful conversation. I really particularly love talking to debut authors because I just remember that period of time, myself. And I think it's interesting to see, it's their first time going through this advent of a book coming out. And how were they feeling? What did it take to get there? What were kind of the slings and arrows of their process and journey along the way? And Katie was delightful to talk to. I really enjoyed listening to her journey. And I think, even as a debut author, she's got a lot of fantastic advice. And it's great to see when a debut book comes out and it does well. And you just know, okay, this person's got a lot more books in their future. So I was excited to talk to her, and I'm excited for her future. So I hope you enjoy. This is my conversation with Katie Lattari.
Hi there.
How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Carter?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
What's going on? You're in Stephen King territory, right? You're up in Maine.
I'm in Stephen King territory.
You guys hang out?
Yeah, we hang out all the time.
That's awesome.
Talking back and forth. Actually, funnily enough, I live on a street in Bangor called West Broadway, and that's the street that his famous red Victorian house is on.
Okay.
It's several blocks down. It's the one that everybody comes and visits to see the bats on the gates and all that kind of stuff.
And didn't he used to do a big thing for Halloween? Then he had to stop it because it got too many people were coming
out of
by.
hand. Yeah, exactly.
To have those problems.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Oh my God.
Well, we can only dream of. Are you a King reader at all?
I am. I really love him. He's great. I
agree.
He's wonderful.
I've had my ups and downs with some of his stuff, and I'm not as attached to kind of some of the fantastic. Mm-hmm. But that being said, Billy Summers, I just read, and I'm like, this is one of his.
I'm in the middle
works.
of that. Yeah.
I thought it was tremendous, and it was just kind of straight up crime fiction. And, I thought that was great. There was no woo elements at all, but anyway, yeah, but I read him pretty religiously.
Yeah. He's great. And you're in Mountain Time. So where are you based out of?
I am just outside of Boulder, Colorado.
Okay. So,
yeah. Cool. I've been here for a long time, about 25, 26 years, something like that. So it's a very chill place to live for sure.
Yeah.
So probably
I've been
not
to Boulder
unlike me.
one time, and it was beautiful. I was like, what, this place? Is this real? This is crazy.
Yeah, no, it's not real, actually.
Oh, it's not real. Right.
Now you didn't grow up there, right?
No, I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
And my family moved out of Brooklyn when I was about 8. My parents were both born and bred Brooklynites. And then my dad's dad had this like fantasy of like, oh, having the cabin in the woods of Maine. And then he and my dad would like go up to Maine, like when my dad was a teenager, every like summer and stuff like that. And so my dad got a taste for it. And then as my parents, as their family was growing, me and my brothers, my dad was finishing up nursing school, my mom was already a nurse, and they said, geez, I can apply for jobs anywhere. Do we want to take the plunge and do Maine like we've been dreaming about for so long? We've had such an affection for it. And they did, and we've been here ever since, and I've stuck around, and it's a great place to be.
Do you have memories of after the move, if there was, I mean, because I can only imagine that you could potentially set yourself up for some disappointment because you've dreamed about this place and then you come in like, it kind of sucks to live here. Was there any of that, or it was idyllic as they had wanted?
I think like for them it was pretty much as idyllic as they wanted it. I think their souls were very much like outdoorsy woods beach people who happen to be born in Brooklyn kind of.
Yeah, right.
And I think though, like as a little kid, like, we'd gone there a couple times when I was a kid, like on a vacation or something, but moving there was like a totally different thing. And so when I remember when we did first move here, it was so different. Just like we moved to a pretty rural town too right away. We moved to Bangor for like a split second where I live now. And then we moved out to this little town called Exeter, which is a tiny farming town that proudly boasts that they have more cows than people. And I was like, it's so at night, it would be so quiet and so dark.
Yeah.
You'd hear a car coming from like a mile away that I was like, oh, I'm gonna like get murdered here. For sure. Like absolutely.
Yeah, probably, right? Like because Brooklyn is the bastion of safety.
Well, this is the thing. That's the thing that's like so funny. So of course, as a kid, you grow up with what you know. You're like, oh, this
Right.
is just like where I live, and it's not a big deal. But then you change, and you're used to people being around, and then you're like, no, this is the scary place. I'm scared of this place that I've moved to.
Yeah.
And then you get over that.
I think that's valid, though. I think small towns are pretty creepy. I love to explore small towns in my writing because there's just such opportunity for insidiousness
where there is
you really, and I never want a town that's too small where everybody literally knows everybody, but not too big, just kind of a bedroom community kind of a place where kind of affluent, lots of gates and just lots of people behind their doors doing just terrible things. I always find but maybe that's just my brain.
No. I think the thing that's always so amazing to me is like, I think, for writers like you, for writers like me, you think of, is this like too much? Is this too far? Would this ever really happen? And then you just happen to pass by an episode of Dateline or something one day and you're like, oh, like stuff like this is happening all the time. Weirder stuff than I'm even thinking of. So like, yeah, nothing is off limits in that way. It's crazy.
But I find it weird also because, so for example, like that, your Dateline example, I struggle to like watch that kind of stuff. It's too much. Most of the time it's too much for me. And then the shit I write, I'm like, oh God, like, but it doesn't bother me. But, I don't even know if I'd want to read it from somebody else, but for some reason I'm okay writing it. But you're right. It is kind of hard to tell sometimes, like, what's the appetite for this and that's what agents and editors and alpha and beta readers are for and stuff like that. And I've found over the years that I have definitely, and maybe this just comes with age, I've definitely toned down, like my first few books, just people were just dying all the time, and now not so much.
Right.
So I don't know if you found that too, but like how do you judge do you get any kind of notes on like, hey, maybe we should back off on this scene a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I'm right in the middle of a rewrite of my next book. And the rewrite was sort of precipitated by the fact that when my agent read it, she was like, this is like a little tough. This is a little tough. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we talked about sort of what the pain points were for her. And I totally get it. Some of it has, to do with sort of child death.
Yeah.
a child dies in the book. And she was like, maybe this can happen like more off screen or something like that. So there are some things where I was like, I really was trying to handle it pretty sensitively, because it's kind of the engine for a lot of the unraveling of a family that happens in the book. So it was important that it would be given some kind of weight, the actual event of it. But after talking it through, I was like, I kind of see what you mean, and we're sort of readjusting and recalibrating some of those things. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you hand something off and somebody's like, oh, really? Like, let's talk
Yeah.
about this.
But I mean, yeah, and you never know what somebody's trigger points are going to be. I remember reading Randall Silvis's 2 Days Gone, who's also with Source Books, and
Right.
It's a great book. But their a family gets killed, and he's not shy about it, and it's super important because it drives the narrative, as did your scene.
Right.
But I was definitely skipping pages because I'm like, that's my trigger point,
Right.
but it's not going to make me put the book down.
Right.
I'll get enough flavor to know the gravity of what happened, but I'm not going to read every single word, because that's some of it I just don't like reading because it's too intense.
Yeah, that's totally fair. You're like you said, I think it just is different for everybody, and sort of what they're it's interesting to hear you say that you sort of feel like you have different levels of what you feel like you can intake versus what you feel like you can write. That's super interesting to me. Yeah. What do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I think I definitely have less appetite for like horror movies, for example, than what I did as a teenager or something like that. But I think when you're writing, because when you're writing, I really stray. My big thing is, like, don't be gratuitous with anything, with language, with sex, with violence. And when those things happen, it has to be totally meaningful, and it has to drive the story. And when they happen, they should have a punch to them. So when I'm writing those scenes that are dark, they're infrequent for sure. But because I've earned those scenes in a way, because I know, and it has to happen. So therefore it lets me do it. If it were like gratuitous and I was writing like, a slasher novel, that doesn't interest me. But yeah, so I think that's a little bit because I'm being precious about it, but I feel like I've earned those scenes.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
When you're living in a cabin in the woods in Maine, and you're young and writing manifestos, when did you start to get the bug for writing, or did it come from just, were you a voracious reader, or do you have memories of that?
Yeah, I mean, I always was into, like, from when I was a little kid, writing and reading, and like I was always the kid who was obsessed with like language arts class and English class and all these sorts of things. And I remember, I think it, like, my writing started where it was like, poetry and like song lyrics and angsty this and that. And then over time I realized like how into, narrative and story I was. And so I started writing fiction, but a lot of it was in like fan fiction mode, right? Where I was sort of playing with forms and stories that were already out there, and just for myself and just for fun. And I just was, I really, really love this. And as I got older, the Trapper Keeper full of loose leaf kind of turned into, I really want to try to like write. And so I always loved doing it. And it honestly didn't occur to me until I hit college, when I met like my mentor, who's still one of my great friends to this day, Professor Dave Kress, who he was like, you could like be a writer if you want. And I was like, what say you? That's crazy.
So what were you studying in college then? I
was studying English, but I had more of this sense that I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, I'll go teach high school English and all that kind of stuff. And I'd never thought of like professionalizing as a writer. And so it was the first kind of light bulb where I was like, like maybe I could try to get published in some way, shape, or form. And then that turned into, get it going for more school for writing and all that kind of stuff, because I really got into it. And then through that process, figuring out, actually, I don't actually want to teach. I want to write, and whatever I have to do to sort of make ends meet while I do that, that's cool. But I don't know that I have the bandwidth to teach well and write well.
Yeah, and there are forms of teaching writing that are outside of, traditional classroom environments for sure, right?
Absolutely.
There's for-profit workshops and all those things that you can just put on yourself, which is a whole other administrative challenge. But there are those opportunities. Now, as you were kind of going through these college years and kind of coming to this conclusion that you wanted to write, was there any education either that you were doing on your own or from the colleges about like the actual industry, or was it just all about the craft of writing?
Oh yeah, that's such a good question. I think this is one of the things that I went through a bachelor's in English at UMaine. I went through a master's in English at UMaine, and I did an MFA at Notre Dame. And they were all very craft focused, right? Yeah. Very craft focused, very workshop heavy, which is wonderful. And you read a lot of theory and all those kind of things. And that was all super valuable. But there's almost sort of like a weird taboo about talking about the industry and like the nuts and bolts of like, how do you like write a query letter, and like how do you get an agent, and like
as if it's like tacky to make money with your writing in a way.
It was really a bizarre thing where I was like, this is really odd. And I've talked to a lot of different people who have been through similar kinds of MFAs, which again, for what they are, they're like really great and wonderful, but they're can be a little precious about themselves. I think about being this place to just think about the art of it. And that's cool. And that's great. But also like, it's okay to want to try to get published and get paid for it too. And that was something I had to totally figure out after the fact, for sure.
You figured out, yeah. It's and because I come from a very opposite school than you. I went to business school and started writing in my early 30s, just literally one day, kind of this weird moment where I just started writing.
Amazing.
And so with zero background, so first of all, I learned how to write, and that just meant manuscript after manuscript,
right?
Sucking a little bit less each time. But learning like, what do I do with? I was literally Googling like, what do I do with a manuscript? Get an agent. How do I get an agent? Google. And there's so much information out there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a while ago, but even then there was, but you just have to learn it. And I'm still learning stuff, right? Like it's the industry is a tricky beast, and you learn what you can control, what you can't control. You learn about PR, how much should I do on my own, how much do I rely on the publisher to do. And I'm a very data and analytical driven person, so I love experimenting. Like, maybe this works, maybe this doesn't work, but let's try this. So, but yeah, it's all self-taught. And I find actually even less value in, I read books about writing. Stephen King's on writing is tremendous.
Right.
And I've definitely, studied it, but you get to the point where you're like, I'm not sitting down thinking about all these different things that I've learned. I'm sitting down and listening to my voice and what interests me and what entertains me. And hope this is going to be meaningful to somebody else. But I don't know what is your style? Do you outline, or are you a pantser?
Yeah, I mean, to this point, I've been a pantser, and then Dark Things I Adore, the book that came out in September, which is my first commercial book, and it's my first thriller. As I was going along, the first draft or two was totally pantsed. And then as it got more complicated, of course, I was like, I have got to start doing something else. I'm going to lose track of what's going on. And so I literally created like in Google Sheets, like a database of like scenes and color coded, what timeline, everything, so it became quite organized. And I think that is going to probably end up being part of the process. Is I'm finding I'll probably start pretty freeform and then have to start to put it into some kind of framework, else I'm not going to survive it. I think that's what I've learned.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I pretty much freeform everything, and maybe I'm 80% in. I'm like, oh, maybe it ends this way. But that necessitates obviously some, I'm a heavy editor and I love editing, and I think that's where all the magic happens, even though it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because I think where I run into problems is whenever I try to, I can maybe outline 3 scenes ahead. Or I just know like these 3 things have to happen however they happen.
Right.
But inevitably, as I'm writing, I always think of something more interesting,
Exactly.
and I'm like, oh, what if he just died right now? What would that do? Well, I love using the words "what if." What if
Yes.
this happened? And maybe you use it, maybe you don't. But it's constantly the "what if." I think it's so important, and that's almost the antithesis for me of outlining, because there aren't any "what ifs" in there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think that's what I found, is that I have to put some kind of bullet point together just to track what I've done, but I don't use it to forecast what is going to happen next. I kind of use it as a way to sort of track what is going on already, so I don't lose track of what was happening in 1980 versus 2018 versus whatever.
Right.
But yeah, no, I feel the same way, where I feel like I usually have like, and it sounds like you might be the same way, where I oftentimes don't have a specific end in mind. I think you were mentioning this, I kind of follow voice and see where that takes me, and see where who that shows me, and what they would be getting themselves up to. And then I have like some vague idea of what I think it's about. But in terms of plot points, yeah, it's very much a sort of this iterative process of just keep going and kind of see what happens.
Right. So you finish up your MFA, you're going to be a writer. You're obviously doing some other job as well, so you can
for sure
eat food and live somewhere. What is that journey like? Is it, because I know you've written some short fiction as well, and I know you had another book out in I think 2016. But what was that journey like? And were there I'm sure there were points of frustration, but was that journey up until your most recent novel that you published, your commercial thriller, was it what you expected, or did you have any expectations of like, this is going to be my road?
Oh gosh, yeah, I definitely was the person who felt like I was kind of groping in the dark for a long time about what it all meant, or who I was, and if I was a writer at all. Like, after the MFA, I just had to get a job, which is what you do, it's normal, and was trying to figure out, do I want to try to teach? Do I want to try to get in as an instructor at a university somewhere? Is that still what I want to do, and then try to write with that? Or do I want to just try to focus on having a job so that I can leave at the end of the day and write? And so it was a struggle to figure out, I actually don't want to go into academia. That was like a big thing that had gotten totally like knotted up in my brain going through like graduate school. And I realized I had to disentangle that and say, no, you can be a writer without being an academic, right? Duh, like, obviously.
Right.
No doy. So like, that's what I figured that part out. But it took, honestly, like, is this gonna sound dramatic? I don't know. I took like going to therapy, because I was like really trying to figure out, like, what am I doing? What do I want to do? What kind of writing do I want to do? And it took me a long time to figure that out. And I figured out, why am I not trying to write the kind of stuff I love to read? I love reading thrillers. I love mystery. I love suspense. Why am I not trying to try that at least? And then I finally had that light bulb moment of like, you should do that, maybe try that and see how it goes. And that's where Dark Things I Adore came out of, was just like being like, oh right, having a little bit more self-awareness about what I enjoy and what I would actually want to put my time into and my energy into. So it was a really, for me, kind of a process of being like, okay, first of all, you don't have to be an academic to be a writer. Second of all, what kind of stuff do you want to write? Making sure I'm not trying to live up to anybody else's expectations but my own, right? These kinds of things. And then I figured out, this is what I love. Let me try this. And thus far, it's worked out. I still have a day job, of course. Like, it's really hard to sort of
Sure, me too,
get out of that, right? So, but that's okay. And I'm like working on the next book, and as long as I can keep doing that, keep doing the writing, and hopefully have books find homes at some point, eventually, like, that's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think all of that is wonderful, and it makes sense to me. I always, whenever I lecture, I always say, I think you should write for yourself. There's some people who are like, I always have my audience in mind. That's fine. For me, it's like, I have to write for myself because I'd go crazy otherwise. I'd be bored. I'd be trying to chase things that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And you can only hope that like what you write for yourself, like I said earlier, is relevant to other people and interesting to other people. But it sounds like with you, like you got into a place where all of a sudden you started writing something that kind of took you to that place of like, oh, I like this. This is fun to do. I enjoy this experience because it's not just data entry. It's
Right.
I'm thinking of worlds that interest me, and that makes it a hell of a lot easier.
It really does. Like once you figure out like what that thing is that you, because I tried writing different kinds of stuff just because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Like I wrote a romance novel. I wrote sort of like a young, like not a young adult, but sort of like a new adult coming of age book during the MFA. That was more just about like these people and navigating growing up and stuff like that. And I was like, and I liked those things and they were interesting and they helped me figure some stuff out. But then I just realized, oh, I love thrillers, I love mystery, I love suspense. And then once I started doing it, I was like, oh right, this is what I should do. I love it.
Yeah, I enjoy just having a protagonist who's constantly guessing what's real and what's what's actually happening. And if you can imbue like paranoia, I think it really propels a story. And I just like having a character who's kind of just uncertain of everything all the time and trying to make the best decisions based on very little information. It's just I find that fun. So I've never really strayed from that premise over the years. It's just could be man, could be woman, whomever. But it's fun. Now, is your follow up to Dark Things I Adore? Is it a standalone?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's another book set in Maine, but it's a totally different set of circumstances, and so it's a whole new thing.
Okay, so but the same kind of vibe.
I would say so. I would say that it's there's a lot of people have sort of called Dark Things I Adore sort of a slow burn thriller, and I would say that that's kind of what this is too, where it's you kind of doing some fairly deep character work, and you kind of seeing the lives of these people unfold and figuring out what was this sort of central tragedy or two that caused all these sort of ripple effects that we're seeing kind of play out through the story. And there'll be a couple of reveals and twists, I think, along the way as I'm doing it. But yeah, so it's definitely the same kind of vibe of like kind of menace, I think, kind of. I like menace in my writing, and that there's always something where you're like, ooh, something's about to happen, something's up, somebody's not saying something.
And it can just be a tone, right? It doesn't have to be over the top. We get it. It could just be like, how a tree looks. Could be like, oh, that kind of is how you describe a snowflake. Could be like, oh, that's kind of creepy.
It does so much. It's so crazy. Yeah.
And I just find people tend to overdo it sometimes. I'm like, give your readers a little bit of credit. And that's another thing you kind of lose perspective on your own. You need your agent and editor to kind of rein you in sometime. Now so then your agent shopped the book and it landed with Source Books, which is a tremendous publisher. It's my publisher. And I've been with 3 different publishers, and I've been with Source Books for my last.
That you love them.
Oh, they're great.
They are.
I could, go on and on, but they are also very data driven. And so I really respect that they really look at the marketplace and they workshop a lot of different ideas about, titles and covers and PR and marketing. And they're a big publisher. So they provide a lot of support, which has been great over the years. So what was the process like getting that first editorial letter?
Yeah, it was cool. Like I think it was one of those things where I don't know about you, but I just felt like, especially this first time, I was like, whoa, like somebody has read this with such depth and such enthusiasm that they have all these incredibly insightful things to say. And even if those things are critical, right, are things
Right.
for suggestions, the fact that they were seeing the book as I saw it, and we're reading again with such understanding and depth, I was like blown away. I was like really moved, actually. It was really, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, it was amazing to get all the lovely praise, of course. That you always start off some praise, so you feel good.
Who's your editor?
My editor was MJ Johnston.
Okay.
She's great. She's
Yeah.
so good. And so like it started off with, tell me what she really felt was working, and then it moves into like, here's some things to think about and questions I had and some clarity stuff. And even those things which can be sometimes hard to go, oh boy, I have some like work to do, it can give you kind of a gut check. I was really sort of blown away again just by the like thoughtfulness, and it really was like so meaningful to me. And then of course you have to get down into the trenches and dig the ditch and all that stuff afterward, and then it's not so great,
Right.
And then
I mean, that first letter is like, okay, that's my February.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big deal. I had one once where like, can we have a subplot? I'm like, okay,
yeah, dude,
sure.
like,
I'll just throw a subplot in there.
Like it's crazy. Like in Dark Things I Adore, the original version that MJ got was pretty much all set in the present tense, and there has an allusion.
Oh God.
An allusion, Carter, to a arts camp called the Lupin Valley Arts Collective in Maine that it's a passing reference where some of the action would have taken place in the past. And MJ's like, interesting. She's like, what if you took us there? Like, what if one of the perspectives was there in the past, so that we get like what was happening at the time from an insider? And so it ended up being like, writing 25,000 new words, cutting 25,000 other words to get those words in, and trying to figure out how to shape it all so that it all makes sense. And I'm super grateful for it, because it totally like makes the whole book like come alive, like having these threads throughout. But it was super daunting, where I was like, well, I guess this is where I found out I can't do this, and this was a huge mistake, and they're gonna say we can't take your book. So I have those panic moments, and then I'm able to forge ahead usually.
And I think it's important because it's funny how little confidence most writers have just about life, and like, I mean, and I'm the same, but it is also important, I think, to have writing confidence, where somebody gives you notes that you agree with, that you have the confidence to say, yeah, I can do that. It's going to be a huge pain in the ass, but I know how to do that. I don't know right now, but I know this won't defeat me. And because it's very easy to get overwhelmed, I think, I
think that's such a beautiful way to put it. And I wish I would have come upon that thought sooner, which is, I don't know how to do this right now. That is it. I think that's the panic moment I get. And my sentence tends to stop as I don't know how to do this.
Right.
And I think, but it always ends, I give it a week or two to sort of marinate, and then I'm able to do it. But that is so perfect. It always kind of feels like that at first, like, I don't know how to do this, but it's right now. I don't know how to do this right now, but you figure it out.
I mean, because I'll give you a month, but I always want to like jump on it immediately, because that's just my personality. Right. But then it becomes overwhelming. So what I always do is I'll, say there's like 10 things that they listed in the letter. Mm-hmm. I look for like the two easiest ones, and I'm like, that's going to be the first thing I do, and that's going to be the last thing I do. And so you have at least some kind of momentum, and then you take a break. And then you had to have your debut thriller released during a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So what was that like? Yeah, I mean, it was also, this was what, August?
This was September.
Okay. So this is Delta variant time. And so it was, I think what was interesting about it, because I was a little anxious about it. I was like, oh, I don't know, it could be tough because there's so much going on, and people are so preoccupied that it might get lost in the shuffle and these sorts of things. But I was, like you said, the Sourcebooks team is like pretty tenacious and really thoughtful about where they try to, place things and get attention for it. And then as it turned out, I think because of the pandemic and
that by that point, and you figure in September of 2021, the whole world had kind of gotten used to Zoom and
Right.
doing things virtually, that I think it actually opened up opportunities for me to like do Zoom events with bookstores that I probably never would have been able to do if I
Totally.
had to go in person, or they would have never invited me to come or whatever. So I think it was like, on the one hand, I was like, ooh, this is like maybe a little weird. And on the other hand, it was actually kind of a lovely way as a first timer, I think, to go through some of those events, which I find a little stressful. I get a little nervous and about sort of being on the spot and being in front of people and stuff like that. And so it was a nice way to sort of be like, all right, I'm in my house, I'm in front of my computer. There are people out there, but it's conceptual. And
Right.
so I think it was helpful to be able to have those kinds of events. And they've been really lovely. I've been really lucky to talk to some really interesting people like yourself. And it's been great.
Well, that's great. And you're right. It's the argument against it is, it's hard to get people to go to these online events. But the reality of it is it's hard to get people to go anywhere. So, even pre-pandemic, when you're doing your launch events, it's really hard to get people to show up. If you're doing your hometown, you get everybody to go to one main event. But then the second and third and fourth events, you might show up and there might be 4 or 5 people there, which is fine. But that's kind of stressful. And, it's a lot of work and you're having somebody, maybe lead a conversation and they're putting their time in. So it's kind of tough either way. And at least if it's on Zoom, then you didn't have to leave your house.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
But I've done some moderating of some online events and it's fun. It's like, you do get much more of a reach. So I don't think you've missed out on much, but I'm sure for your next one, hopefully we'll be in better shape for you to to go outside a little bit and to meet your fans. Then, well, we're going to wrap up, but before we do, we're going to do a little storytelling.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So this is the part where we make up a quick story. It'll be short. We're just going to pick a random sentence from one of these 3 books that I've chosen, and then I'll read that sentence, and then you just give me a couple of the next lines, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'll do a couple lines. We'll see where it goes. It could be dark. It could be romance. It could be erotica. We can do whatever we want with this.
All right.
But I've chosen 3 thrillers. So I have Harlan Coben's The Innocent. And this one I've never read. I don't know why it's on my bookshelf. The Tourist by Olen Steinhauer.
Okay.
Which Stephen King says the best spy novel I've ever read that wasn't written by John le Carré. So there you go. And J.D. Barker's The Fourth Monkey.
Okay.
So choose one of those.
Let's see. Let's stick with our Stephen King theme and go with the guy who has the blurb for.
Got it. The Tourist. And it's a big book. Give me a number between 1 and 550.
Ooh. Let's say 377.
Okay. And then give me a number between 1 and 5, and that'll be the sentence that I choose.
Let's do 2.
Okay. It's a good setup. So I'm going to read this and then give me a couple lines and I'll call it quits after a couple minutes. She started the car, but waited until her shaking hands had calmed.
She wasn't sure what she would do next, but she knew it would have to be something drastic.
She pulled out onto the road, the only light coming from the nearby streetlights. She could still smell him on her clothes, and it almost made her gag. Funny, she thought. I used to love that smell.
She pulled off onto the road, thinking of what the smell used to remind her of: security, safety, love, a family she once had. And she couldn't believe where she was now.
She eased onto the freeway, making sure to keep her car at exactly the speed limit. She tried to remain calm and recalled some breathing exercises from her meditation class. It was all she could do to keep from hyperventilating. And as she drove into the night, she finally managed to get her breathing at a place that she thought she could work with. And that's when she felt the wet on her jeans and she knew it was his blood?
The first thing she thought was, this is a man I used to love. I only had planned to go to his house, talk to him, talk about what had happened the night before. And now I can't. Now I have to think about how to get the stains out of my clothes and the guilt off my conscience and what I'm going to tell our son.
She was able to somehow push through the concern about her son and her emotion and knew none of that would matter if she were caught. So she had to come from a place of logic. She had to come from a place of deception. She had to know how to hide the evidence. Her first stop would be a car wash.
She knew it would be important after the car wash to go to the storage unit that she'd set aside for this purpose. She'd been thinking about what she might do if she ever lost her cool. And now it had happened. Did she feel bad that she had thought this far ahead, that she had a storage unit? Yes. Was she here now? Yes.
I think we call it there. I love the fact that she had a storage unit already rented out. She's not so innocent. There's a little premeditation going on.
There's a little premeditation. I love
that. Was fun.
That was fun.
It's nice to kind of visualize it all with somebody else.
Yeah.
The ultimate pantsing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, listen, Katie, I'm so excited for your recent release, Dark Things I Adore. What a great title.
Thank you.
Was that your title?
No, source books.
Yeah.
They were so good. I was like, that's so much better. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great title. I love it.
It's really good.
But that's very exciting. And I'm looking forward to your upcoming novel as well. And what a pleasure it was to talk to you today and pick your brain a little bit.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Katie.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
That was my conversation with Katie Lattari. I had a great time, as I always do. Well, not always. I mostly have a great time on this podcast. Some conversations are a little bit harder to work through than others. But I felt like Katie and I clicked. I felt like, it was very easy to have a conversation with her. And I thought she had some tremendous insights that hopefully you will all benefit from. If you want to know more about Katie, you can go to her website. And I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right, because I'm saying Lattari. Could be Lattari. So sorry, Katie, if you're listening to this, I butchered it. But her website is katielattari.com. KATIELATTARI. If you want to find out more about me, just go to my website, carterwilson.com, and you can see my events, sign up for my newsletters, and all that good stuff. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation today. I know I did. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. More episodes out soon. Take care.